Okay, we're good. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Grief and Mental Health panel from Youth Move Virginia. I've got three amazing panelists with me today. I've got Ann Moss, Shirley, and Emma. And today they're going to have a brief discussion on grief and just the grief topic in general, because boy, is it a lot to talk about. So we're going to go ahead and start. And Ann Moss, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then Shirley and Emma can go after, that'd be great.
Hello, my name is Ann Moss Rogers. Ann Moss is my first name. That's a Southern thing. I lost my youngest son, Charles, to suicide. And at that time, I owned a digital marketing firm and I never got back into it. So I sold that marketing firm. I wrote a book called Diary of a Broken Mind. I went on the speaking circuit. I run a support group. I go into everything, mental health, grief, and suicide prevention. That seems to be where the world is pushing me. And I appreciate everybody being here today.
Okay, my name is Shirley Ramsey. And I guess what brought me to this topic, I guess you could say, was sort of a lifetime experience with loss. I went through a tragic loss of my mother when I was 8 years old. Then as a young adult, her brother, my uncle, he took his life by suicide. And then also when I became middle-aged, my sister lost her son to suicide. And then I lost my 16-year-old son to suicide. So I guess I didn't really feel like I truly started my healing process till my son died, and I got involved with the American Foundation for Suicide. I've been a volunteer for 11 years, and I learned through their loss and healing activities, and then became trained by AFSP, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, to be a support group facilitator. And that is now a big part of my life. And I really like helping people and with grief and loss. And also, I'm a school counselor by profession. And my first experience with helping others with loss was helping a child who lost his mother. So that was sort of the beginning of that, learning how to help others with loss.
Hi, all. I'm Emma. Wow, these are two amazing stories and biographies to follow, so I'll try to keep it a little bit brief. I lost my very close friend to suicide in 2015 while we were both in college. We were 20 years old at the time. So since that time, I've become very passionate about, suicide prevention and discussing grief and suicide loss with young people, young adults who are going through their own grieving journeys. And it took me a little while to get to a point where I felt like I was ready to address grief. But I'm very glad to say that some of the women on this panel helped me to get to that point. And I'm grateful that I can now sort of pay it forward and do some of that work on the other end. So I'm really glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you all so much. So I think it's just best if we just kind of jump into talking about grief. And so one thing that I think a lot of people struggle with revolving grief is, what does grief feel like? And so if you all want to just kind of talk about feeling the feeling of grief and kind of what that entails and your personal stories with that.
Where do you want us to start, Sophie?
I mean, I think, a big part of our mission at Youth Move is sharing our stories, and just kind of, I think a lot of people may struggle with, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm not sure really what grieving feels like. So just kind of talking about like embracing those feelings and kind of what that all entails, if that makes sense.
I think any feelings you feel are justified, and I think you have to acknowledge all of them. So when I speak to youth groups, I think one of the most important things is you have to feel the feelings, and you can't heal if you can't feel. So I think some human beings, and for whatever in our culture, we often think, well, we have to push that away. Being strong is, not feeling the feelings, when that's just not the case. And you have to kind of, so for me, it was kind of figuring out that rhythm and then recognizing, okay, I'm going to feel the feelings, and then knowing when to kind of go distract myself and do something else. So that took me a while to figure out that balance.
When I think of grief, I don't think so much about grief. I think more of loss. Loss, the death of someone is totally out of our control. And, it's hard to deal with things in our world, when it happens and it's something that we don't have any control over. So I think that really gets us all off to a rough start when it comes to grief. What do I do with something that I didn't have, that happened to me, that I had no control of? What am I going to do with this? So I think grief is something that we have to learn what it is, learn to understand it, learn what it does to us. I think about loss, and one of the emotions that causes anger is loss. So you think about, I had learned that anger can come from fear, hurt, loss, or frustration, and notice loss is one of those things. So loss to me brings on the strongest of strongest emotions, and sometimes emotions that we've never really had to tap into before. So it's like exploring the unknown when we go through loss and have to deal with grief. And something else that my minister, who had lost his son to cancer, said, you don't have control over it. And if you don't mourn it, then your journey sometimes can get stuck. So we go through grief, but we all don't mourn appropriately. And what I have learned is, once I started the mourning process, I began to heal.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I sort of had a similar experience in that I just, for a long time, didn't really know what to do with what I was feeling, because I was feeling so many different ways at different times. And, sometimes I would just be incredibly sad or overwhelmed. Other times I'd feel frustrated or angry and feeling, a lot of guilt around the loss. And other days I would feel numb. I wouldn't feel anything at all. And just not really knowing like whether that was right, or if that meant that my grief had gone away, or if it had just changed form. Eventually I realized, yeah, it just takes on that form sometimes. But it wasn't until I really let myself feel those feelings and address them and really face them that I started to heal. So I think that's a really important part of the journey, and it's different for everyone. So just have to be honest with yourself.
Yeah. And you all kind of touched on this, but I know most of us are familiar with the 5 stages of grief, and we've always heard that it's, you're angry, then you're sad, and then it's, eventually it's acceptance. And so could you all kind of talk a little more about the 5 stages of grief, and if, since it's not linear, it's very different, if you all would just kind of maybe touch on the differences and, your experiences with that?
So, it has a nice, one thing I like about seeing that graph was I just had no idea what this journey was going to bring. And that brought on a lot of fear in me. Like, I'm not going to be able to survive this. Well, what am I going to do? So at least seeing some kind of documentation gave me some kind of map. But what happens is you make this progress, and then along comes a birthday, and you're just thrown back in this awful numbness. Like, Monday is my son's birthday, so I've been overwhelmed and unorganized all week, weepy. And you know, I'm probably going to be weepy today on this video, but I'm struggling a lot because he would be 26 on the 26th, and it just makes you a mess. But you have to understand that all feelings are temporary, and that's what I tell myself. Although it's been 6 years now, so at first grief was this awful thing that, oh, I just have to endure it, I can do this, and pep talks. But now it's something that when it hits, I want to go cuddle with it, because grief is love, and it is the tie to the one I lost. So I want to cuddle it and treasure it a little bit, because it is less frequent than it was at first. At first, it was consumed me, and it was, you know, trying to get out from under it. And now it's not quite the same. So that journey evolves, and you can feel some of those things in those written stages, but you can also not feel some of those things. But definitely the giving back and the acceptance are definitely stages that I haven't experienced. Now, I feel like I have experienced them, even if I didn't experience them exactly in that linear fashion. It's just been kind of back and forth, and it's more like that. You know, it's kind of a tangled mess of unorganized emotions that you somehow get the rhythm of over time.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think the stages of grief, you know, what is it? Denial, depression, bargaining, anger, and acceptance. I think they are. And of course, not in that order. And some may feel some of those stages more than others, or be more significant in their own personal life. When I think of denial, you know, I can think of the losses I went through, and I remember thinking, gosh, is this really happening? I mean, is this happen? When my son died, it's like, this can't be happening to me again. You know, and I've heard so many people in our support group say, you know, I just can't, I was in such a shock. I can't believe it. I'm living in a nightmare. How many times have we heard that? You know, there's that denial of, can this just be a dream? Can it please be a bad dream? And can I please wake up and this all be over with? So I think, you know, that is, you know, I think probably most people do really go through that. But I do see some people that don't deny it. They know it, they expect it, and particularly if it's a, you know, maybe from a terminal disease or something, you know, they know it's coming. So sometimes that denial is not such a heavy stage for that particular person. Now, you know, we get to that point where we just want that person close to us. What can I do to bring them close? We wish we could bring them close enough to bring them back into our lives. We bargain, you know? So I can say probably bargaining has been a big, big part of my life, because a lot of the things I do is a way of keeping Jackson alive in my life, or keeping him close, or keeping my mother's presence close, or keeping my nephew's presence close. What can I do? Well, how can I bargain to get him back? So I think, you know, I think that's kind of a stage that can be ongoing for some, because you're always wanting to find a way to bring them back into your life, or to keep them alive, or to feel them, or to hear their voice, or to smell something, a smell that was theirs. You know, that you bargain all the time trying to bring those things to you, you know. You know, in my life, even with loss of suicide, I think anger is a big, big part of that. But for me, with each loss by suicide, I probably had less anger, because I began to understand mental illness more. And I knew that it was something that I didn't need to be angry about, because that person was ill. It wasn't something they did to get back at somebody. It wasn't something they did, as so many people think, a selfish act, you know. So, you know, but I do remember at one point thinking, gosh, Jackson, I gave you all the skills to ask for help. I taught them to you. I made a point to teach them. You had the support. You could have had the resources, and you didn't take advantage of them. And I remember having that anger at him. That was probably one of the stronger angers. I remember being angry at my mom for abandoning me. You know, why did you leave me? I needed a mother. And I didn't feel that till about 2 years after she died. I think I was in denial for, or understanding the permanency of death. It took a couple years, you know, so I've really learned to understand how kids grieve a lot, because I can remember how I handled it and how I didn't handle it, or how I was the child in 3rd grade the year my mom died whose desk was put out in the hall because I talked too much or I acted out. I was seeking attention because I had gone through loss, you know. So I think it's really good to understand a lot of behaviors that you see during grief are because of loss, you know, and the changes in behavior, particularly, we see a lot in people who've gone through grief. Sadness, you know, probably some of this, you know, that continuous crying that goes on. You know, when it first happened for me, it was a lot of crying, and every once in a while something will pop up and I'll go into that sad stage, and feel like crying or really feeling that sadness. I remember I'm a pretty high energy, hyper person, and I don't sit still much. But for me to sit in bed all day long on the anniversary of his death, that to me was a sadness that I had no control of. It just hit me, and I was like, my body won't move out of this bed. It's not going anywhere. It's just going to stay right here. And, you know, that was kind of a feeling of that sadness. And then as far as getting to the point of acceptance, oh my gosh, that's, you know, it's been 11 years since my son died. And, you know, that acceptance, there were times I thought I accepted it and then I realized I hadn't. And then I thought I accepted it and I realized I hadn't. And now, you know, I want to take those experiences and practice empathy now. You know, I want to be able to hear other people's grief, and I want to help them release it, and not say, give them sympathy and say, oh, I'm sorry, but say, thanks for sharing that with me. You know, thank you for trusting me to hear your story. That's what people want to hear. They don't want to hear, you know, I kind of get frustrated when someone says, oh, I'm sorry. You know, it's almost like I just wish you'd say, oh, thank you. And I like it when people say, thank you for sharing that story. That really tells me a little bit about you. It tells me they share their story. So, you know, those stages, and I probably had, those stages were different with every loss that I had. And so, yeah, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, well, that was really helpful. And you covered so much of what I didn't even realize I had been thinking and going through. And it just made me realize, you know, progress isn't linear. And it's a really difficult and unique journey for everyone. And I think to sort of focus on the acceptance piece, you know, I also sort of really struggled with that. And you know, over the years, trying to get to a point where I was like, well, when am I just going to kind of be done with my grief and be over it already? You know, it's been, you know, ruling my life for a long time. And I wanted to move on, not just for myself, but also for her, you know, like she would have wanted people to go on and live their lives and not be stuck. And I think I realized, like, I'm never going to accept that she's gone, you know, like in some ways, I'm never going to accept what happened, but I can sort of accept that grief is going to live with me for the rest of my life. And it's okay. And it can be something that I acknowledge and that I attend to and don't shy away from. And, you know, it's something that a lot of people experience, and I can maybe use my experience to help them get through their journey in a healthy and sustainable way, in a way that doesn't, make their lives overwhelming, in a way that can help them heal. So yeah, I think acceptance for me has been more about that, accepting that it is a part of my life. And that's okay.
Yeah, I've always wondered, like, the word acceptance just seems so passive in a way, like that one day you're just like, you just accept it. I've never, that's always been one I've struggled with. And Shirley, I wanted to go back to something you had said as well, because you had mentioned empathy and people saying, I'm sorry. And there's just this quote from Brene Brown that always sticks with me, and it's sympathy drives connection, empathy fuels connection. So saying I'm sorry that happened drives people away, but if you say, wow, like, I don't even know what to say, but thank you for sharing that with me, like, that means a lot. You're right, it does kind of make people feel comfortable to come back again and be like, hey, remember last week when I was feeling okay? This week I am not feeling okay. And I think, like, it, and I really love that all of you have just mentioned that. I feel like growing up, we always heard, like, grief is linear. It's, it happens and then you're angry and then you're sad and then eventually you accept it. And I've always been like, something seems off to me about that. And I'm just curious if you think there's any other stages, like maybe, Emma, you had mentioned a while ago, guilt and things like that. And Shirley, you had mentioned, like, anger at, like, I set up the resources, like, I wish you would have just said something. And I'm just curious about how, guilt kind of fits into this story as well for you all, because, you all have lost people very tragically. So how have you kind of dealt with any guilt you may have felt or feel about, your losses?
I think for all of us, I will say that I also felt relief. So my son suffered from depression and addiction, and our lives were chaos for the last 5 years. So when he died, I felt sad, but I also felt relief. And then I felt guilty for feeling relief. And then I felt guilty for missing such signs of monumental unhappiness. How could my son struggle with this since middle school and I never knew about it? So that we tend to go through those coulda, woulda, shouldas. And early on, I just told myself, I'm going to go through this, but one day I'm going to forgive myself for all this. And yeah, I'm going to torture myself a little bit now, try to recognize it, pull myself out of it, and remind myself I don't have control over another human being. I'm not God, I'm not Superman. And that helped me. So I used a lot of self-talk through this. That was a big part of my healing journey. And my son was very angry at first. And I had to learn to meet my family members where they were, instead of getting upset how they answered things or how they felt. I had to meet them where they were, because they were meeting me where I was. And that, as a family, we needed to do that. And I had to accept whatever emotion my oldest child was going through, because he had just graduated from college. He felt guilty, but he felt more anger at first, because he'd not, Charles's problems had been in the spotlight. He'd finally graduated from college, the biggest thing to happen in his life, and his brother kills himself. And he said, this sounds so selfish, but I'm mad because I was enjoying that moment. And I felt like he ruined it. He says, I know better now. He said, but I felt that way at first. But you know what? I felt so honored that he shared that with me, and that it just made me feel so good that he shared that with me. And I think I finally accepted that I needed to meet him where he was. He recognized that.
Yep. Back to that. What'd you say?
Guilt.
What is it? Sympathy drives. Would you say it was again? The
Sympathy. Yeah, sympathy drives connection and empathy fuels connection.
Right. That's funny that you mentioned that, because a friend of mine who's also a retired school counselor, we were having dinner the other night, and she said, I want you to watch this video by Brene Brown and on empathy. And I watched it, and that was at the beginning of it. And you know, that if we can teach that, I think it is so helpful to teach people that it's not about giving sympathy, it's about, you know, having empathy and really trying to understand how other people feel. That's what I think has helped my healing, is being able to empathize other people's loss, you know. And now I look at it as, well, you know, you somewhat have a gift or a skill now that, you know, you can share your empathy with others and teach empathy. You know, that to me is just so, I'm so passionate about that. It's just, that's what I want to do, you know. And I realize now it's those people that listened to me or appreciated my story. You know, when you would get that feedback, and I know, Ann Moss, anytime you get feedback when you speak publicly, you probably get that feeling of thank you for sharing. And, you know, but getting back to guilt, you know, I guess, you know, being a mother and losing your child, and you're the protector, and you weren't able to prevent and protect and being in the mental health profession, and having a child, and having really worked hard to prevent that. You know, my sister's son died by suicide, and I was like, that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen to me. And it did. And you talk about feeling guilty, like I didn't do the right thing. I missed, you know. And then Ann Moss said forgiveness. Oh my gosh, that's what I think so many of us forget, that we can forgive ourselves, you know, for feeling guilty or maybe making a mistake. And you know, there's not one thing that usually contributes to a death. And you know, I don't like to think, you know, I may have contributed in some small way, but I can't take full responsibility for someone's death, you know, that happened unexpectedly and out of my control. But I think I see so many people in grief do that. They take responsibility and they can't let go of it. You know, they feel that guilt, and they don't forgive themselves, and they don't, you know, what could I have done? And, you know, you're only human. And all of this is kind of over our heads. You know, we can't expect to be all knowing all the time about everything, and we're human. So I think if we can forgive ourselves and be imperfect, is really a good place to be. You know, we don't need to be perfect and feel like we could have stopped it or prevented it or been more perfect to prevent that.
Shirley, do you think it's kind of like we put magnifying glass on all the things we did wrong at first, and really don't give ourselves credit for all the things we did right? I think it was once I met you that I recognized, wow, good people, this happens to good people too. I'm not flawed, you know. And once I met Shirley and got that support, you know, it started to really take shape. What was your thought there about kind of looking just at the, you know, your mistakes?
Who are you at? Who are you asking?
You asking you, Shirley, because I remember talking to you at first, and I was so focused on kind of putting a magnifying glass on all the things I did wrong. And I think it was when I met you that I started to be able to kind of pull back that lens,
right,
and look at all, like, the 95% of the stuff I did right.
Right.
You know?
Well, I think one thing that helps me is when I say, predicting that he was going to die by suicide was over my head. It was something I didn't know enough about, and I can't blame myself for not knowing. And you know, it's just what it is. It's the beast of it. And we cannot control all things. And that's the other thing. I think the serenity prayer, I think, is a really good way to accept grief. Those things that we can't control, and knowing the difference of what we can and what we cannot control. I think that's a lot of what helps me. And the other thing that helps me a lot, I think, is knowing I'm not alone in this battle. Going to the first Out of the Darkness walk, or the second or third, when there are 1,000 people standing around, they'd all been through a suicide loss. It was very good to know that I didn't have to live this battle by myself, that there's a lot of people here that probably have a little empathy, and maybe I can give a little empathy, and we can have a family of people that can bring that connection that you're talking about.
Yeah, I'll also add, going back to what Shirley was saying about, responsibility and how no one person is ever fully responsible for anything that happens pretty much in the world. Just the importance of keeping that in mind. And, I had done a lot of thinking over the past however many years about, the fact that the system in a way is sort of set up to fail us. We don't really have this infrastructure, the resources available to really do as much preventative work as is probably necessary. And keeping in mind that, like, there are people doing amazing research and work towards that goal, also, helps me sort of get through, day to day, and realizing, like, not all hope is lost. There is really amazing headway being made. But at the same time, like, we're not there yet. And there's only so much we can do as individuals to overcome not having all the resources that we could possibly have available to us to be able to get people the help they need. And that's just a reality for a lot of folks. So yeah, I think I have experienced, blaming myself as well. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of forces that we can't control, and a lot of things that could be improved, and that would better everyone's lives and would make this work a lot more feasible.
Knowing you, Emma, I have heard you say somewhere along the line in our many conversations that, losing someone whose life should have lived a lot longer. And, you really seem to have a passion to help young people, because I think losing young people is, I think that you said that was one of your struggles. How has that changed in the way you look at it? And what has made that change, if you have changed?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I'll admit, full disclosure, I do still think about that. I think about how many amazing things she probably would have gone on to do. And at the end of the day, this is a tragedy. It's senseless in some ways. It didn't have to happen, but it did. And so I do catch myself thinking every now and then, about the amazing accomplishments she would have made and the people she would have impacted, just knowing how much she impacted me in such a short amount of time. I just know that legacy would have continued on, and it does in some ways, to the people that she did touch and who she did inspire. And you were talking earlier about bargaining and trying to keep our loved ones with us, even though they're not anymore. And I find myself doing that in some ways through, the career I've chosen and the work that I do. And it has a lot to do with what she taught me and the person she was, and keeping her, her memory alive through what I've decided to do and how I go about my day-to-day life, and how I just engage in the world around me. So yeah, I think that is something I think about, but it's changed form over the years, and hopefully has been able to be harnessed for something a little bit more positive as time's gone on. But I'm sure you've had similar experiences thinking about, your children, you and Ann Moss both, and that must be tough, especially since you have other children as well who like you want to see grow up and do all these things in nursing, do all these amazing things. And yeah, I can't imagine that experience.
But it helps me to hear how you have learned to deal with that, keeping the memory alive, thinking what contributions in such a short period of time of her life that she made, and how she continues to make contributions through you because you've chosen a career, related to mental health. And it's, I like hearing that.
I'm just so honored to have witnessed your growth, Emma. I mean, to see how you've kind of leapfrogged ahead in terms of maturity has just been so uplifting to me. So having you part of our group and watching you grow, it's meant a whole lot to me. And I'm gonna cry now.
That's so sweet. That
really
means the world to me. No, it means the world to me. I feel like, Charles and I are the same age, almost exactly. And I feel like in some ways I've gained mothers through this. Like I've learned so much from you both and have just gained immense perspective on the world. And anything that you sort of see in terms of my maturity or development is just a mirror reflecting back what you've taught me. So I really do appreciate, all that I've learned from being a part of, this community, even though it's not one I would have ever voluntarily chosen to be a part of.
Yeah. Oh, I'm getting emotional now too. Oh man.
I'm glad I got my queen note.
Yeah. And I also, I've lost people, but I've never like lost someone very close to me until very recently. And I think, you were talking, Emma, about thinking about like the life that your friend would have had and all these things. And I think like as time goes on, you kind of start to see them and other people you have close. And I feel like that is such like a, for me, I'm a big believer in like signs and things like that. And when I was in high school, a cheer coach of mine passed away very suddenly in a car accident, a motorcycle accident. And his favorite color was purple. And whenever I saw purple after that, I was like, he's saying what's up, like he's checking in, like, and it was always purple when things were going really well. And then like in college, I got to college and like I saw purple when things were not going well. And I was like, okay, this is a sign that like if it's not good now, it will be better. And then like the people around me, I was chasing like the people who had the great qualities in him, because I was like, that's what I want around me. I want to like be present with people like him, because obviously like you want to surround yourself with good people. And I think over time you kind of have an appreciation of those things of like, man, this is why I loved having them around, and I'm getting that now. And I feel like they're kind of like sending me these people, which they'll never replace the person you lost, but they still kind of make that like, okay, like I can have people around me that can remind me of you, and I can celebrate that and celebrate you. And again, like going back to empathy, which I think empathy is just kind of like a umbrella word for just how to connect with people. And I think telling people like, hey, you remind me of someone that meant the world to me, and like telling them why, I think drives that connection or fuels that connection even more, of like, connecting not only with the new person, but also the person that is no longer with you. And I want to just thank you again for sharing all those stories, because I think like I feel like you all touched on things that people don't really talk about. Because I Googled grief and it was all like, it'll pass, you'll feel better, da 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 da. And like, you talking about in a way relief and guilt and sadness and anger not only at yourself but them, or other influences. And Emma, you talked about suicide prevention, and as a social worker by training, housing is suicide prevention, poverty is suicide prevention, like all of these things are suicide prevention that, you're right, we can't change overnight, unfortunately. If we could, we would. And it all kind of goes back to this overarching theme that grief is a loss of noticing it's a visual representation of loss of control of something. And
Right.
That's so difficult as people, because I don't know about you, but I'm one of the people that's like, I feel like I know better than almost everyone, and I could have fixed every problem. People would have just listened to me. And grief is letting go of that idea that, I can't tell people what to do and I can't fix everything. And that's probably the hardest part of the human experience. And I imagine as a mother too, that's another layer of like, I'm protecting you. I'm here. I can help if you just asked. And I think I just really appreciate you guys sharing, using those words, because I don't feel like a lot of people, I'm sure every parent has felt that way one time or another, but maybe feels scared to share. And so I'm so grateful that you have created an environment that it's safe and comfortable to share the true feelings. And, Ann Moss, your son sharing, I was angry, it's valid that they felt angry about it. So just thank you again for sharing all that. And this kind of goes into a good segue of just kind of coping strategies. And, like we've said, grief is not just something you wake up and it's done and you feel good and ready to go. And so if you all just kind of want to share some coping mechanisms that you've used or that you've seen other people use, I would love to hear some.
So one of my chief one was writing and running. I kept running, and I ran the day after he died, and I kept running. I kept up that because it was important to me. And I would start off and I'd feel like every limb had lead in it, but I kept it up, and I'm really glad I did. But writing, and I decided to write publicly on my blog, Emotionally Naked. And a lot of people connected with that. And it actually was the building blocks to my writing the book, finding a support group. So I didn't find just one thing. I kind of had this whole toolbox of things. And so it's music, it's creating rituals, it's, a bunch of things. But what were the main ones for me were exercise, connecting with other people who've been through this kind of loss. So I needed to connect with other people who had lost by suicide, because that guilt part was so difficult. And I feel like I started to think of coping strategies in terms of healthy and unhealthy. So I decided, no, I'm not going to drink any wine or do any substances. That was just going to delay my healing process. And I didn't want to be stuck in that real agonizing, difficult part any longer than I was. So I made a point to, I'm not going to drink for the next 18 months. And that was a personal choice. I mean, I didn't have a problem, but I didn't want that to become a crutch, because I had seen it become a crutch. I had lunch with one guy who said it'd been 7 years, and he's like, it's never gotten better. And he was so negative. And I left that lunch going, oh my gosh, this is awful. I will never get any better. And then I had lunch with my friend Roz, and she let me talk about it, and we talked about it. And then she started talking about vacation, and I'm like, whoa, you're talking about normal life things. And she goes, well, it's been 7 years. And I thought, I want to be like Roz. So I asked her more questions, and the giving back piece, I know that's been really important to Shirley too, is when I give back, I heal too. So I'm having this support group and I'm facilitating it with Shirley, but I'm also getting healing through that. And, all my efforts to prevent suicide help me in my healing journey.
Yeah, I'm with Ann Moss. I have a toolbox with many, many things in it. And I probably have tried anything and everything that has been suggested over the years. But, because I'm just one of those, well, let me try that. Let me try that. Let me try that. And, I think one thing that's really important, and I find that I feel the need to help people with this, that I see that are grieving, is being aware of your feelings. I feel that so many people are not quite know what they're actually feeling. They think they know, Or it's like someone say you seem really angry, and they go, I'm not angry. It's kind of that kind of thing, or no, I'm not really that sad. I'm just, I'm in a bad mood today. So I think the more and more we can really be in touch with our own emotions and learning what they are. And a good way to do that is maybe try to write them down. Even look at a list of feelings and circle the ones that you connect to. See where your body is, see what your body is feeling, see what you're going through. And it might help you to understand why you're acting the way you are or not acting the way you are. So I think kind of stopping sometimes, and it may be through, like Ann Moss does it through writing. I may do it through some journaling or writing a note to someone, or reading other people's writings. I did that a lot at the beginning. I don't do as much of that now, because sometimes I find when I read about more suicides, it just makes me sad when I look at support groups. So for some people, that's really good. There's some social media support groups, and sometimes I'll read those, and there's so much negativity, sometimes with some of the replies, and that can be upsetting to me. But being with others, sharing, talking about it, and not being ashamed of the fact that my son died by suicide, the fact that my son suffered from a mental illness, that's such a stigmatized topic that being able to talk about it has really, really helped me. And it's like every time I share my story, someone says thank you, and then they come back with their own story. So I have learned that really helps. So I think that I did individual counseling at the very beginning. A lady that at my church, who was a professional counselor, and she did counseling at our church, and she had counseled me when I was having marriage struggles. So she knew me and she knew my children. And when Jackson died, she said, you know what, Shirley, you're coming to me. You don't have a choice. You're just coming to me. I'm going to counsel you. And I'm not going to charge you anything, but you are coming to me. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. If you say so. And so, I was jump started. And I think for some of us, getting into that, like Emma said, it took her a long time to even seek help and deal with her grief. So, if we can find getting into it, I started counseling once a week, and then we started it every 2 weeks. And then we did once a month over about a 1.5 year period. We went from once a week to 2 weeks to once a month, till I forgot to go a couple of times. And then she said, I think you're fine. You don't need to go anymore. She was just saying, look how much you've grown, and you've actually forgotten to come. So that says that you're not feeling that need to come to me anymore. And that was a really good, her helping me realize that I was growing. Like telling Emma she's growing is a way to help you realize that you are growing when someone sees that process. So I think being around people that and that will reinforce you. Being in a support group, we reinforce each other all the time in our support group. We tell each other all the time how we've helped each other, or how we've seen them grow. So I think support groups, I think being able to tell people when you need to pass, or when you need to not talk about it, or when you need them to not say the things they're saying, being able to speak up and tell people. And also I've learned that what's helped me too is when people say the inappropriate things to me that really bother me, I just kind of say, that poor person doesn't know understand what I'm going through. They lack the knowledge. They lack the experience. I'm not going to get mad at them for saying something bad to me. That's helped me, because I think a lot of times people will take what someone says to them very personally, like, how dare them say that to me? Where really that person doesn't really realize that they're saying something that is triggering your loss and your grief and in your pain, when they really think they're helping you. So I think sometimes distancing myself from inappropriate comments or accepting the fact that they're the ones that lack the knowledge, that's helped me cope. Hiking, canoeing, that scene behind Ann Moss's head, I canoe under that bridge, and it's probably one of the most peaceful places that I like to be. So I think putting ourselves, whether it be through a mindfulness or getting ourselves in a place where we just kind of go, whether it be, I think we all need those moments, that mindfulness or that moment of peace, or letting ourselves sigh, and then of course the empathy, being able to share and help others with the empathy that I've learned, helps me tremendously to help others. I mean, that's all, and cry. I can't tell you how many of the out of the darkness walks I've been to that I just cried my eyes out. So I have gotten to mourn over the last 11 years, but I'm mourning from the time I was 8 years old until the death of my Jackson. So my kids were like, Mom, you too obsessed with this stuff. And I said, you know what? I got to catch up on some mourning. You got to let me do this. And I think we need to allow people to grieve in the way that they need to grieve. That's my mouthful for now, I guess.
I totally agree with that. I think so. Okay, a few things. So the first is just the importance, as Shirley mentioned, of boundary setting, and knowing, sort of being honest with your body and with yourself about where you're at and what you're capable of engaging with or doing or talking about. And, it might be that you just don't want to talk about your experiences one day, or maybe there's one day where no, you really need to talk about it. And it's worth seeking out people who will be there to talk about it when it's time. And to make sure that you surround yourself with the right people for the right place that you're at. And don't feel pressured, to share or not share anything. If you're ready, it's time, The other thing I'll add is, specifically having gone through this loss in college, without many sort of resources or any sort of prior relationship with a therapist or anything to really guide me, I'll say, if you can access therapy, it's extremely helpful. And I'm such a huge advocate for mental health care in any form, especially individual and group therapy, especially for young people who, may not think it's something they need or think it's something they will get something out of. But at the end of the day, it's the thing that helped me the most when I was able to access professional therapy and also group peer therapy. And I'll say, when I was in college, I just didn't really have the support system or resources to know where to go or what to do. And, the college campus I was at only gave you 3 free therapy sessions a year kind of thing. And that was not going to be enough. And I didn't really feel like I knew how to get help off campus or anything. And so I think something also to keep in mind is there are so many free resources I didn't even know about at the time at a lot of people's disposal. The internet's amazing. AFSP's website has an immense amount of resources that you can access, different coping sort of strategies and different trainings and people talking about their stories and different ways to sort of see what helps. You can shop around a little, it's different for everyone. And what's helpful is different for everyone. And I actually, the first time I actually even tried to sort of get professional help for grief was a year and a half, maybe even 2 years after my loss. And that was it was a new support group for people who had lost a loved one. It could be anyone, and it didn't have to be to suicide. It was just anyone who's going through experiencing grief. It was open to all the students on campus, and it was really nice to be surrounded by people who were in a similar place in their lives, and who sort of didn't necessarily share the same experience of grief or loss, but were experiencing it in the world in a similar way, if that makes sense, because they were also college students, they were also away from home, they were also, all these different sort of similarities that helped us connect and helped us grieve together. So yeah, I think that can be a really helpful way of approaching the healing process as well, to find people who are sort of in a similar place in their lives, even if they don't have the exact same experience with loss. But yeah, boundary setting is a big one for me, and also, leveraging the free resources that are out there has been really helpful.
That's great. Thank you all for sharing all of those. I was taking notes because I was just, for myself too, I just love to know more. And I think something you all kind of mentioned is, and you didn't say it blatantly, but you all did, was celebrating the little successes of, like Shirley, you mentioned just taking a breath. Like, I remember like a friend of mine's parent had lost a child, a 7-year-old with a brain tumor, and they knew it was coming, but you can't deal with a 7-year-old. It's just unimaginable pain. And I followed kind of like her grief journey on Facebook, and she just posted one day, like, I felt for the first time in a year, I have actually taken a breath, like just actually sat down and breathed for a second. And so I think all of you just kind of mentioning, Emma, when you finally were like, I want to try something, I want to see, I'm not alone, and I feel really great in that connection, even though, not everyone has the same experience as me. And Moss, you said routine, like getting back into just the daily lifestyle. And, I think people may confuse getting back to your routine with acceptance. And I'm kind of like circling back to, just because the word acceptance in grief just doesn't really click with me, honestly, still. But I think there is beauty in celebrating those moments of, okay, I did the thing. I went to the grocery store. I got lunch with a friend. I talked to somebody because I really wanted to talk about them today. So thank you for sharing
Took a shower.
Took a shower. Oh yeah, I live with depression, and I'll tell you right now, like, those basic hygiene things are like the hardest things to do sometimes, when you're just like, it is hard enough existing, let alone taking care of myself. So I just would love to celebrate you all in that. And I think, also giving back, you guys all said giving back is something that makes you feel connected, and it makes you feel like, again, a success of, I can celebrate the life of my loved one by helping other people to know that they're not alone. And, I'm just so in awe of all three of you, honestly. And so you all did kind of mention this as well, but I would love to circle back of, there are a lot of people who have never really known what grief feels like. And I know that that's a struggle for a lot of people. Is, I have never lost a loved one. How do you feel is the best way, and also not the best way, to support loved ones? And Emma and Shirley mentioned boundary setting. So what are some ways that people supported you that worked, and hopefully they had good intention and did not work, so that people can kind of know, if I have a friend or a loved one that has to go through grief, how can I support them?
I think being very intentional. And I decided from the beginning that whatever people said came from a place of love, whether it was the right thing or not. So I went ahead and decided I wasn't going to be angry about any of that. But I loved people who were very intentional. I mean, I'd lost a son. I needed to plan a service, write an obituary. I had to fill out paperwork. I had to get ashes. I had to get death certificates. So it was those friends that said, I'm here to hold you up, and let's go plan this service together. They planned meals. They helped do practical things that I needed done, that I wasn't, the first time, 3 days after your child dies, you're just really in no shape to walk to the grocery store and shop for yourself. But guess what? That still has to happen. So I think that intentional help, and I always recommend that a friend sit down with another close friend and say what it is they want. I even have a worksheet for this, because once you can work together with that one friend about what you want and what you need, they can spread the word to everyone else. Because what happens is everyone else has this fear. So I met with this group of other mothers, and one of their sorority sisters had lost her son to suicide. And one of the ladies said, well, should I text her? And I'm like, how long have y'all known each other? She said, well, a few decades. And I'm like, have you picked up the phone and called her? And she goes, well, and she kind of made all these excuses. I said, well, let's unpack this. Why do you think you haven't called her? And finally she goes, I'm scared. I'm really nervous. And I said, well, if you called her, can you tell her you're really nervous and just be very vulnerable about that? And she goes, I hadn't thought of that. And I said, 6 months after Charles died, I bet I got 4 phone calls in that 6-month time. I mean, it was so empty day after day. Not really anybody was getting in touch. And I needed people to be intentional then too, and not forget 6 months later or when the holidays come around, just say, how are you coping? You know, I've thought about you. And at that point, if it just wants to send a text, but people forget that you've had this monumental loss, and at those big days like the holidays or their birthday, they need a little extra support. And I think that's really important.
I so agree. Intentional help. You know, when people just recognize that I have been through loss in some way, shape, or form, whatever their form may be. We came up with, the preacher at our service came up with this term, Jacksonize. You know, Jacksonize yourself and be kind to others. So one of the teachers at the school that I worked at made these stickers that people could put on the back of their cars that said Jacksonize. And, you know, 9 years later, I get a message saying, guess what I saw today? A Jacksonize sticker on the back of somebody's car. You know, and just little things like that. It's just those little intention. I just want you to know that I remember him, and I recognize that you lost him. The evening that he died at early morning hours, you know, like 2 o'clock in the morning. And the next morning, I got a call from one of the parents of a child, 2 children that I had coached and been their school counselor. And the father called me at 9:30 in the morning, just concerned about me. And to this day, I think about that phone call and how brave it was of him to call me and just say, oh, Shirley, oh, Shirley, oh, Shirley. I mean, you know, that just, you know, so I think, like Amos says, it's okay to be vulnerable when you talk to somebody about their grief. It's okay to let you know that it even makes you sad to think that you have to, you know, let them know that they're sad, you know, recognize their sadness. It's okay to feel that. And just letting people listen to me and allowing me to talk about my son is so helpful. You know, it's those that go, oh, okay, yeah, all right, yeah, and they move on. And that's all they can handle, and that's okay. It doesn't make me mad or anything, but I do like to hear that, or I like it when people can hear me and listen and feel and have empathy for me. That's what helps me, you know, from other people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think what's helped me over the years is I've gotten better at sort of being very upfront and like very honest about like where I'm at and how I'm feeling about things. And even when I meet new people now, I eventually end up talking about Olivia, and I sort of introduced her as like an important part of my life. And so a lot of my friends, even those who never met her, had a chance to get to know her. because we were childhood friends, you know, they know her, they know about her, and they know when her birthday is and when the anniversary of her death is. And they know that's like a hard time for me. And I've been very lucky. I have really supportive friends who've been very, very kind and understanding. But I'll say I will go a little negative for the things that didn't work. Just to add a few of those points from actually going back way back right after she passed, and some of the things that were said to me that just didn't feel right. One of them was at her funeral, and people knew how close of friends we were. People who I hadn't spoken to in a couple years at least would come up to me and say, you know, I'm so sorry for your loss. And like, it never really rang right in my head, because it's like, it's our loss. Like, it's the whole world's loss. And I wanted people to like see that and feel that. And it just felt like, but I will say, like, there's definitely a difference. And I agree with Ann Moss. So like, people don't, you know, a lot of people are just trying to do the right thing. They're really not intending to cause any harm. And so for that kind of thing, like, I don't blame people for saying things like, I'm sorry for your loss, whatever. Like, it's like, that's just what people are trained to say. And they may have not experienced it, and they may not know that it doesn't quite sound right in your head if you've grieved. But I will say at the same time, though, there are some people who I know maybe didn't have the best of intentions with some of the things they said about her passing. One in particular, and this is just one of the weird things about suicide loss, is that people are afraid to talk about it and to discuss specifically how someone died if they die by suicide. And I remember very clearly a woman who was the mother of a mutual friend of ours talking to my mother, and I was listening, you know, I was right there next to them listening, and she sort of tried to sort of rewrite the story of how she died, and said she died a different way, and how tragic that she died of a heart condition. And that's just very clearly not what happened. And I think that was so hurtful to me, because like, she was sort of erasing this very honest, like the truth of like Olivia's life and her death. And that just was really hurtful to me. And it has always stuck with me as like, it's never the right thing to do to pretend like something else happened. Like, it's just best to be honest and to confront the reality of what is going on and of what happened. And that's the best way to heal and move forward. So I think, you know, people often try to cope in their own various ways, but some are more benign than others, I think. And some have very, you know, can have really serious consequences. So I think, yeah, just asking people what they need and like what is good for them, I think is the best course of action. If you don't know how to talk about something, it's just best to ask. Like, whatever you need, I got you, kind of thing, you know, and not to try to like change the narrative to make yourself feel more comfortable, you know.
Yeah, I think you all kind of brought up too the shame that can come with someone dying by suicide and how taboo that's been in our society forever at this point. And I think I just think like you're right. I've seen people doing that, of like trying to just like change the narrative, and it's like, no, because this won't stop happening if we keep brushing it under the rug. Like, we have to address the problem. And you know, I think it can be kind of, you know, coming from someone who's had to help people grieve and never really thought I had experienced it as deeply as some others. It's, you never want to step on people's toes. You never want to make people uncomfortable. If you want to, do you want to talk about them? Do you not? And I think a big part of that is if we can just overlook that uncomfort and lean into the uncomfortableness of it, is what helps people move forward. If we didn't talk about the stuff that's hard to talk about, we wouldn't be here. Your group wouldn't exist. I mean, like, we don't move forward as a society and as people if we don't try to connect on the hard things, because unfortunately life is full of hard stuff. And so, you know, I think people, like you all said, they may have the best intention, but sometimes it may not come across the right way, or you know, it's not exactly what is needed. So I think you're right saying, like, if a friend of yours lost someone, saying like, how can I support you, or man, I'm so sorry, and Emma, I think you're right. Like, it does sound kind of weird to be like, I'm sorry for your loss. And we all lost someone, the world lost someone. And I think just death has always been something that, I mean, American society has always been really weird about talking about. I think, we just kind of, we have, we grieve and no one talks about it. And I think, going back to that Brene Brown video, they talk about someone having like a miscarriage, and sometimes women are just kind of expected to have the miscarriage and move forward and not grieve that. And so I'm just thinking back to this whole, it all kind of comes back to empathy and just kind of channeling that. And I think we talked about this earlier offline, but you can grieve more than just people, and we were talking about 2020. I graduated in the middle of a pandemic and I lost a graduation ceremony. And I can't tell you how selfish I felt. I was like, I'm so sad, but there are people whose families are dying and I'm sitting here crying because I don't get to walk across the stage. And if anything, that channeled my empathy even more of like, oh, okay, so this is what grief feels like. Like, you feel weird talking about it and you feel uncomfortable and you compare your pain to other people's. And at the end of the day, like, the human experience is hard. And if we don't talk about it, then everyone's kind of suffering in silence. And so that kind of just wraps up our conversation. I just, again, want to thank all three of you for sharing your stories. I am so honored. I took so many notes just sitting here because I just think it's such helpful information that you all gave to us. And we will have a resource guide ready with the resources that they all provided, as well as some other ones that, we can search around and look for. So I'm going to stop recording.